Scream is one of my absolute favorite horror franchises, and we got a new movie just 14 months after the last Scream movie. So today I'm going to stop and rank all 6 Scream movies from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of all 6 Scream movies. My list is not the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. One quick announcement before we get started. Later this month, I have 2 live events coming up. I'm going to be at Fan Expo Cleveland with John Flickinger and Austin Burke leading a couple of different panels. And then at the end of this month, I'm going to be at MegaCon in Orlando with Cody Leach, as well as 4 other full-time movie YouTubers. We will be revealing each of those names over the next week. I'd love to meet you at either one of these events. With that said, let's get started. For me, easily coming in last place is Scream 3. The basic idea of setting a Scream movie during the production of a stab movie is actually really clever and consistent with the franchise as a whole, and it takes the story and puts it in a new, interesting setting, Hollywood. The execution of that idea, I just don't think works in the end. And a big part of the problem here is likely that Kevin Williamson didn't return to write the script, and instead Ehren Kruger took over the main screenwriting duties. Ehren Kruger is a professional screenwriter who's been doing this for over 20 years now. He's one of the guys that worked on Top Gun Maverick last year, but he's not someone with a very distinct style, and certainly he's not someone with Kevin Williamson's voice. And I feel this entire movie is lacking that distinct flavor of a Scream movie that Kevin Williamson brings to that script. It has all the beats it's supposed to have, the twists and the turns, the meta commentary and everything, but without the wit and cleverness that he brought to the first 2 films, as well as then again in the 4th film. And the idea of Sidney's brother existing in general, I wasn't crazy about, and tying her mother into Hollywood, once again, not crazy about it. But the idea that he was the mastermind of the first 2 movies, I just didn't buy into it.
Step 3, right?
It just went too far with too many implausible twists and turns. And the movie tries to cover its ground by having the video of Randy talking about, it's the closeout of a trilogy, all rules are thrown out, anything can happen.
If you find yourself dealing with an unexpected backstory and a preponderance of exposition, then the sequel rules do not apply.
But that's just a lazy trick in order to excuse lazy writing.
Well, that's just lazy writing.
Well, as we call it out, it's okay if we do it. No bulletproof vests don't make you invincible, and saying that implausible things will happen doesn't mean that you can just write anything that you want. And it's also a movie infamous for having constant reshoots. One clever bit in there during the Jenny McCarthy sequence, she calls out the constant reshoots, which was probably a little bit of commentary on the movie itself.
Has there been another goddamn rewrite? How the fuck are we supposed to learn our lines when there's a new script every 15 minutes?
In the end, it doesn't really work for me as a whole. All that said, if this is the weakest movie in your franchise, your horror franchise is doing great, because this is an entirely watchable film. It still has some funny bits. There's some fun kills. The cast is still likable. It's competent enough in its execution while having to strain some credibility to pull it all together. But in the end, the biggest crime here was Gail's hair. Number 5, Scream 4. But to be perfectly clear, while this isn't 5th place, actually, the next 4 on the list are pretty close in my mind. They're all strong B's to A minuses, kind of all pretty close in there. And depending on my mood, I could switch the order around on these films. And I feel like this movie delivers all the stuff that I want from a Scream movie. It kicks off with a great, very meta cold open with movies inside of movies leading to actual murders.
There's no element of surprise. You can see everything coming.
Did that surprise you?
Totally dug it. Nice cameos. Something different for the cold open. You get some solid new characters thrown into the mix. Of course, the big standout being Kirby.
Halloween, Texas Chainsaw, Dawn of the Dead, The Hills Have Eyes, Amityville Horror, Last House on the Left.
A fan favorite that they had to basically bring back from the dead for the new run of films. The cast here is crazy good. I mean, the Scream movies have always had stacked casts, but like you've got a Culkin, you've got Alison Brie, Adam Brody, just in kind of like small roles. And then of course you've got a Roberts thrown in there. There's so many names and faces. Anthony Anderson to like a weird degree. Like the fact that Adam Brody, who's on the poster, and Anthony Anderson are just like these throwaway side cop characters that don't mean anything to the plot is almost weird because they're so overcast for the characters that they're playing. And not in even like a Drew Barrymore cold open of the first film kind of way. They're just throwaway characters that aren't memorable. So when you watch this movie, it's like, oh yeah, all of these awesome actors and actresses are in this film and weren't really given all that much to do because the cast is so big and has so many great people in it just to kind of be cannon fodder to be killed off by Ghostface. But it does everything that I want, but it doesn't have its distinct place in the franchise, I feel. It's the one that I feel has the least distinct identity out of all of them. It didn't have kind of an interesting meta commentary and the way it was tackling horror films or the franchise as a whole. Kind of did this idea about you got to film the kills and everything, but didn't feel like it really touched on anything. It didn't have any real commentary to it. And so we're back in the same city, same set of characters, new people thrown in, but a lot of the same characters. And so just a little bit familiar. That's why it's lower on the list for me. I actually really do enjoy this film. It works for me on the whole. I dig it every time that I watch it. It just isn't as distinct as the four higher up on the list. Number 4, Scream 2. Right off the bat, it was clear they knew exactly what they were doing with this movie.
Oh, please. By definition alone, they're inferior films.
Where instead of making the meta commentary about people in a horror movie that knew they were in a horror movie, they literally take the first movie and make it a movie inside of this film that characters go and see, which is one of the most brilliant concepts that this franchise ever had, and it has served the franchise really well over the last 25 years. But they just kept that creative streak from the first movie going, and they take that monologue that Randy gives about horror sequels.
How do we find the killer, Randy? That's what I want to know.
Let's look at the suspects.
Where everything is bigger, their kills are more extravagant, the reveals more outlandish, and it runs with that and delivers a bigger, bolder sequel that is on a much grander scale. The first movie's third act is just at a house. This movie, it's across an entire college campus. You get more elaborate stunts, and as Randy put it,
more blood, more gore. Carnage candy.
There's a lot of just important little details for the franchise as a whole. The killing of Randy, the continuing relationship between Dewey and Gale, and just solid execution from beginning to end. From giving Dewey this specific music cue that becomes iconic for him, which coincidentally, ironically, wasn't written for this movie. They just stole a music cue from Broken Arrow. Gave it to Dewey, and that's stuck around for 25 years, a stolen music cue, and it's great. It's perfect for him in these movies. There's some great little sequences, like the part where they're trapped in a car and they have to climb over Ghostface, where they're just waiting for Ghostface to wake up. So just solid Scream movie from beginning to end. Not quite as fresh, maybe doesn't stand out the way the top 3 do in certain ways. Kind of that same criticism I sort of had of 4, of just not popping as much, but great horror film. Real quick before I give you my top 3, remember to join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of the Scream movies. Also, I have done a ton of these horror franchise rankings. Evil Dead, Conjuring, It, Insidious, you name it, I've probably done it. You can check those out in this playlist right up here when this video's over with. In third place, Scream 6. And I think right out of the gate, this movie has two things that work greatly in its favor. First off, setting the story in New York City. It's a city with such a distinct flavor and vibe to it that it just feels different. It provides a bunch of new opportunities for what Ghostface can do and has to do that makes for a bolder, more outrageous Ghostface in this movie. And just these little things that are unique to urban living with subways, apartments, high-rises that just change things up enough, provide new opportunities that aren't present in the suburbs. They're not really present in Hollywood that you get in this movie distinctly. Second one, I think it was to the benefit of this film that Sidney is not in the film because there's not really a reason for her to be here. And the nature of this franchise allows it to move beyond her. And I think they set up a new lead character or a new family of lead characters to move the franchise forward where we don't need Sidney in every single story. And you can do different things by not forcing Sidney into every story. Along those lines, I like the fact that we have a lead character now who is one of the craziest characters in the entire movie. She's seeing visions of a killer all throughout the entire film. She kind of likes to kill people and is drawn towards doing it, but she's not the killer in our movies. I like that edge that they give to her that someone like a Sidney and a Gale, they don't have that in them. And of course, bringing Kirby back in, great to see her again. And it's fun because she's now 12 years older and gone from high schooler to now full-blown adult with a career. The movie has some of those brutal kills of the entire franchise. As we kind of get into the reveals of Ghostface, who lives, who dies, starts to strain a little bit of credibility. Like, I enjoyed that it kept me guessing from throughout the entire film. I mean, even in our cold open, they're messing with our expectations of a Ghostface ripping his mask off in the first few minutes of the film, and then that is not where the movie goes at all. And so it kept me guessing.
You know you're like the 10th guy to try this, right? It never works out for the dipshit in the mask.
By the time you get to the end, it's kind of like, okay, we're doing this again. Okay, this feels like we're straining a little bit of credibility. Wait, how many people survived being gutted in this film? So I was debating whether I wanted this one to be a little bit higher. Some of that stuff, what's holding it back at this point in time, but I just thought it was another solid entry in the franchise. Our runner-up, Scream 2022. And what I loved about this film is that they found the right angle to continue that meta commentary. Whereas the original film was commenting on slasher films of the last 15 years, this movie was commenting on the craze of the last 10 years, these legacy sequels. And it does it by like pinpointing the tropes of Hollywood as well as the reaction from the fans. And it's able to fully just incorporate that into the movie as a whole. It once again is just like has its finger on its pulse of the discussion surrounding sequels, legacy sequels, the horror genre, elevated horror, all of that stuff. And it fits perfectly with the nature of this franchise. Of all the sequels, this is the one that I think best captured that meta commentary that made the original so fresh, so original. Along those same lines, I like the new characters that they gave us and the direction they went with that of having Billy Loomis have this daughter who's kind of lived with this secret her entire life that finally kind of comes out when Ghostface returns. I like that journey that they kind of did with that. It's a very different type of character. It's a different tie to the franchise that has new opportunities that are kind of interesting.
Never fuck with the daughter of a serial killer.
And with this movie, we've got a new team of directors, we've got a new screenwriter in the mix, but I feel like they really were able to kind of capture what makes this franchise work. You get some more violent kills. There's a certain viciousness in their two films that I think really works for the franchise and gives these movies a new edge. Now, when it comes to the legacy characters, for the most part, I liked so much of what they did and the reasons they gave for what was going on.
Do you have a gun?
I'm Sidney Prescott. Of course I have a gun.
Seeing kind of where Dewey's at, the reunion scene with Gail, I thought was fantastic, especially on rewatch. The death of Dewey, not on board with it. In particular, when you realize, like, wait a minute, that was like a high school girl. No, I'm not buying it. This does not work for me. Certainly hurts this movie for me. It makes it not as strong of a runner-up on this list as it otherwise would be, and certainly not as distinct as it was a year ago when I first watched the film. But all of that said, if you remove the treatment of the exact way that Dewey died in this film, because I don't even mind that he died, but the way that he died, I like the idea of it. I like that we went back to the house. All of these sorts of ideas of how they pulled things together, tied it all together, it worked for me. This was a great horror legacy sequel that, save for the treatment of Dewey, I loved what they did here. But of course, coming in first place is the original Scream. I've said it many times before, this is my favorite horror film of all time, and thus naturally, it's number one on this list. But I was in high school from 1996 to the year 2000. That was the Kevin Williamson era of horror films, and thus this franchise, this movie just means so much to me, as it was so much of what kind of shaped my love of horror films and kind of watching them as they came out, owning the soundtrack to each of these movies. And it all goes back to the original film that is just like a great slasher film in its own right, but it just introduced all these great elements to take it to this whole other level. It opens with this cold open that's essentially a mini movie starring Drew Barrymore, watching her slowly getting killed by Ghostface. There's just such sharp dialogue as it starts in one direction of this person getting this phone call, kind of flirting with the person on the phone.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
They're people that know horror movies while they're in a horror movie, and then it quickly escalates into this horrible, shocking death where her parents are right around the corner, almost could save her, but they're just not quite there. And right there in the cold open is what makes this franchise so great and so brilliant. Drew Barrymore, the biggest star of the teenage characters in this movie, killed off in the cold open. She's right there on the poster, killed off in the opening moments of the film. Anybody can die. And as she's dying, she pulls the mask off the killer, but the audience doesn't see who it is. And so it creates that Scooby-Doo whodunit situation where everyone is a suspect throughout the all of these movies. Anyone can be the killer, anyone can be killed. Likewise, has that meta commentary, talking characters that are in horror movies that know horror movies. And so as we go through this, they realize our characters know they are in a horror movie as it is happening.
Never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, say, I'll be right back. I'm getting another beer. You want one? Yeah, sure. I'll be right back.
Which is such a distinct tone for a slasher film, in particular when this movie came out. And that formula, it still works over 25 years later. And because this film was so successful at it, we're still getting Scream movies a full generation later. To get real specific about that, my mom asked me what did I think about the new Scream movie, and it occurred to me that I am currently the age that my mother was when the original Scream movie came out back in 1996. A full generation has passed with this franchise, and it's one of the most consistent horror franchises that we have ever had. Horror franchises typically at some point in time go completely off the rails. I don't think this franchise has ever gone completely off the rails. I think 3's pretty weak, but it's not totally off the rails. It's still watchable and enjoyable, and all of it goes back to a great set of characters, a great formula that started with this movie, so it comes in at number 1. If you enjoyed this video, remember I've done a ton of other horror franchise rankings just like it. Check that out right over there in that playlist. Remember, I'm going to be at Fan Expo Cleveland as well as MegaCon in Orlando later this month. I would love to meet you there, and keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.